everybody, it's me, Peppermint, and this is an exciting moment. We are here having a very special conversation. Listen, if you have been watching, I always say it is nearly impossible to not be involved or think about or hear about something going on in politics. And these days, during the Trump campaign, or Trump administration rather, there is so much going on that's questionably illegal. There's a lot of reasons to be bringing up law. I think I've learned more and talked more about the law process in the past couple of months than I have in the past couple of decades. And that's not a good thing. Anyway, so if you're joining us right now, I'm so excited for y'all to be here. Listen, first things first, if you're watching this stream, make sure that you share this stream to your channels, to your socials. Let's get more people on here right now. We are in the comments talking and answering questions, and because I know that this is going to be a really interesting conversation, but there's also probably like some serious questions that we're going to be able to answer. And so if you have any questions at all, please drop them in that chat and we will address questions in the chat. But we have a lot to get to. I'm so stoked. Now, I first met this fabulous human being, I don't even know, several years ago. It might have been like 2020.
Yes.
When everybody was tuning in to their, when everybody was locked in and looking on their devices, getting, damaging their eyesight. I definitely was. And had an opportunity to speak to her class. She is a University of Michigan professor and a former Supreme Court clerk. But most excitingly is an author of a brand new book called Lawless. It's a long title. How the Supreme Court Runs on Conservative Grievance, Fringe Theories, and Bad Vibes. That is the truth. We have with us Professor Leah Litman. Hi, Professor Litman.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. Now, this is a live show, and we want people to be able to tune in or to be able to ask and answer questions and interact. We're going to be doing all that in the comments. And so, have at it in the comments. We aren't going to have time to like bring anybody in or bring anybody on to the broadcast. I ain't got it like that. I'm running tech myself. So we're just going to steam right ahead because we have lots to get to. Number one, just like right off the bat, in terms of like current events, and I know you probably are sick and tired of talking about this, and I don't want to talk directly about it, but here we go. I was shocked when I opened up my social media, aka the news, and saw that New Jersey mayor was arrested. Newark, New Jersey mayor was arrested for trying to get access to, or at least being around, the ICE prison detention facility. What is the new ICE prison down the street? And that was a shocker. I think a lot of people are seeing, clearly, a lot of people are seeing news and headlines, but like clips and instances almost on the daily now of ICE, rolling into a neighborhood. Before, like a few weeks ago, they were getting people at places of work and things like that. Now they're like rolling into just like it feels all over the place. It's like very steeped into our society now. Like there's almost no place you can't go that feels like you're not seeing a clip of somebody being dragged out of something by some ICE
officers.
Hirees. Yeah. ICE employees, let's call it that.
Who are usually wearing gaiters and masks.
Yeah, oh gosh. And so what is going on?
Yeah, so I think we should understand these aggressive uses of immigration and customs enforcement in at least two ways. One is the episode with the Newark mayor was wild because the mayor was there with several congressional representatives, and under federal law, congressional representatives are entitled to engage in oversight and inspect federal facilities like that. And ICE didn't let them in for over an hour. And instead,
they were trying to get them to go away.
Yes, exactly. And instead, they arrest the Newark mayor. And to my mind, it's very similar to, the Trump administration also indicted some state judges for allegedly interfering with immigration enforcement. And it looks like they are basically trying to prosecute perceived political enemies. Like they're using criminal law and immigration law to go after people who don't agree with them. And it's a really terrifying escalation of, using the vast apparatus of the federal government to just go after anyone who disagrees with you. So that's kind of how I see what's going on, is they are just trying to terrorize people and scare them away from standing up to the administration. I mean, the young woman, Ms. Ozturk, the Tufts student, she was arrested for writing an op-ed and hauled off the street again by masked men, right, in an unmarked vehicle. You only do that if you are trying to terrify people. And so that's what I think is going on.
It's a shame because it is a terrorism, but it's not quite an empty threat,
no.
Right? This doesn't feel like a case of like, oh, their bark is worse than their bite. I'm assuming, or it feels as though we only have a few shots where this is mostly theater before it just becomes commonplace and practice.
Yeah, I mean, the scary thing is, for the last, 5 decades, so much of immigration law has expanded and just given presidents vast authority, sweeping authority to conduct immigration enforcement. And until now, presidents have not been reaching back and using some of these statutes like the Alien Enemies Act, for example, which was enacted in 1798 and only used 3 times. Donald Trump is trying to use that now. They're trying to use
on
these.
The daily.
Right, exactly. They're trying to use these federal laws that were really only enacted during the Cold War in the 1950s. Like, that is the law they are trying to use to deport, the poor Columbia students and Tufts students. It's terrifying. And if I could just link this to my book. So if you want to learn more about how the Supreme Court has kind of enabled this. So my book, Lawless, talks about how the Supreme Court, and specifically the Republican justices, they're obsessed with the idea of political power and executive power. And so last summer, when they told Donald Trump he was entitled to immunity from the criminal prosecutions, where a special counsel was like, dude, you tried to overturn the election, you can't do that. When the Supreme Court said, actually, Donald Trump is immune, they said presidents have complete and total authority over investigations and prosecutions. And here's the wild part. Even if they are carrying out those investigations and prosecutions for personal reasons, like retribution or revenge. And so the Supreme Court, I think, kind of gave Donald Trump this green light to use law enforcement powers for improper reasons.
Even if that were like, I'm trying to imagine, even if that were a president that I voted for, that I supported, I don't know that I would want, especially, aside from the fact that they are going, I'm trying to think about it. I can't think that I would want that to ever be the case. I can't think of there's not a single situation where I would want a president to have that much power and full immunity over, like, just being up completely above the law, even if it were a president I voted for, especially considering that president is not going to live forever. So whoever the next, there's going to be another president that my side doesn't like. So why are they thinking that they're just going to change it back if a Democratic president or somebody gets in?
If they allow a Democrat to become president, that's probably the right phase. I wouldn't rule out, the possibility that they basically say, oopsies, we take that one back when a Democrat is elected to president, because, if you think back to what the Supreme Court was doing during the Biden administration, the Republican justices got their panties all up in a bunch when Joe Biden tried to cancel student debt relief. They pretended like that was the greatest tyranny to have ever happened to America. And you actually had, it's totally wild part. some Trump-appointed judges on the lower federal courts, so like not the Supreme Court, but like the trial courts, liken Joe Biden's debt relief plan. I'm sorry, I'm laughing. It's just that ridiculous. To the rise of Hitler. Like that is literally, how these Republican appointees are looking at Democratic presidents. And so, and yeah, again, sorry, I'm just gonna, you say this and it's like, how can this possibly be real? And yet it is. So I'm gonna use another example from my book, Lawless. During the oral arguments on the student debt relief case, all of the Republican appointees got so angry, they kept asking the lawyer for the federal government, why is student debt relief fair? Why is it fair? Isn't it unfair to all of these other people? And then they wrote into the opinion that student debt relief raises questions that are emotionally charged and personal, and use that as a reason to invalidate student debt relief. So basically, because they didn't think it was fair, because they didn't support the policy, they use that as a reason to say the Biden administration can't cancel like 20 million borrowers' student debts.
I mean, I guess it's like a smorgasbord for them of like the goodies that they want. Obviously, they've already established that whatever it is that this Democrat wants to do, if they want to go to the restroom, we're going to figure out a way to shut down the restroom.
Yeah.
I know that's like what they did, especially after we witnessed the blocking of Merrick Garland by the Congress during Obama's term. But I have to think that, especially when it comes to like student debt relief, that they are thinking down the lane a little bit. Knowing the relationships. I mean, if there weren't lobbyists, if there weren't all these corporate relationships and ties and all this money in politics, then I would think, oh, they're just doing it just to spite the. But there's no situation where they would ever want somebody who's paying them to get upset for legislation that they don't like. And so this really must just be the allegiance to the almighty dollar.
I mean, that is, again, so I have these different chapters that like focus on different areas of law. And the fourth chapter is There's Always Money in America. And it's about the role of money in politics and political corruption and how the Supreme Court has cleared the way for these super rich individuals to just unload massive amounts of money into politics and kind of buy themselves influence over politicians and access to politicians. And the Supreme Court basically declares that the God-given right of these mega rich individuals, like, a big theme of the book is this idea of conservative grievance, as you read from the subtitle, where they think conservatives, Republicans, they're the victims, like they're being unfairly persecuted. And in this area, like political spending, the Supreme Court has actually written into opinions how the mega rich are being unfairly targeted by laws that try to reduce the amount of money in politics, because they say these super rich individuals, they have the right to use their money to basically buy influence and access. And that is the worldview that these Republican justices have and are like shaping the law around.
It's almost as if nothing else matters. I know that's like the most like obtuse thing to say, but it really does feel it's just discouraging in a way, because with not just with money in politics, but with everything that's happening, frankly, I can see just 3 months ago, 4 months ago, a year ago, just with a little bit that I knew about the different things that were happening, I could see that we would end up where we are today.
Oh, yeah.
And it was obvious that it was that could happen if certain things happened. And I feel like we've been reliving that experience over and over again of like, oh gosh, they want to start, I could see the connection between the attacks on deporting demonizing then deporting college students who are protesting, lawfully protesting, then moving to undocumented workers, people who are working and paying money into our system, but being demonized and being scapegoated and taken out of, deported. Those two groups being attacked and deported, simultaneously trying to like mess with the passports of trans people, but mess with identification of individuals. And I just reposted a story today, and I knew this back when they were putting in all these very strict and sort of establishing all these very strict laws in terms of ID, with access to voting and needing a real ID to travel. I knew that was going to immediately impact like a lot of First Nation people who were indigenous, who were not born into this system in the same way that we were, but that also impacted a lot of people in Georgia whose vote was in jeopardy because they were born in modern times, but in a day and age when you didn't automatically get, black people weren't even considered humans at a certain point. And so how can someone who wasn't considered a human receive a social security card and a government issued ID and a birth certificate? So these people are being disenfranchised, obviously, and you can see where that's headed. If I can see that, cannot the entire Supreme Court see that?
So they are so caught up in their own far right conspiracy theories that they view basically any criticism of themselves or any attempts to say, hey, it's illegal discrimination for you to deny passports to transgender individuals or to suppress the votes of black voters. They treat that as worse than the actual discrimination. So they treat accusations of racial discrimination or accusations of discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity as the real problem rather than the actual discrimination. I know, again, you say this and it's so wild, but they've just occupied this down is up world where they make everything about them. And it's guys, laws that prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, those are about the civil rights of the LGBT community. They're not about you, right? They have the worst main character energy. It
is so ridiculous. And we're obviously the ones who are going to suffer long term. I mean, I really do think, I don't know, do we set it? We're obviously doing it now, but do we set up a system where the president is the king actually king for 4 years? And then it just automatically goes back? Because I know, on a real petty level, I think a lot of people who are a Democrat are going to want, to be able to have to be well, y'all remember y'all did that? Now we're doing the same thing. And I just don't know, is this permanent? Are we, I don't even want to ask that question speaking into existence, but I don't understand how anybody would want to go through this and who works in the legal system, who works in government, and aid this happening without thinking about the implications for the future.
I mean, the scary part is maybe they are thinking there's never going to be a Democratic president again because we just plan to entrench our own power so much that we will make it impossible to elect Democrats. But then the other part of me just...
But then who else arises? It's okay,
J.D. Vance, right? And then J.D. Vance's child, and then J.D. Vance's child's child, and so on and so forth. Baron, the Trump, but whatever.
No, but part of you, what were you going to say?
Yeah. So, and part of me also thinks they are banking on the fact that Democratic politicians never use the full scope of their political power. So, of course, right, Democrats aren't going to nominate someone who actually would say, oh, here are all the things I can do to basically entrench Democrats' political power and make life harder for Republicans. That just doesn't happen.
It never will. It never will. You could see, I mean, it just feels like it never will. And that it feels like, it does seem as though the system that we built is connected to capitalism. It is literally unsustainable. But it feels like the system that we built, obviously imperfect, it's clearly not sustainable. And certainly now it feels like it's going to get mucked up beyond repair. So here's a thing. In under an administration like we just described, where all this is happening, and even on a grand scale, people are getting deported and for writing op-eds and their opinions, and on a minor, or not minor scale, but at an earlier date, what we were focused on books being banned, is now the perfect time. I mean, now for us, the perfect time to put this out is, but did you feel any sense of worry in speaking truth to power in such a way like this?
I mean, there's always a risk, but I think I'm a law professor. I have a very privileged position, and so I should use the platform that I have to try to inform people of what the Supreme Court is up to. Because what I try to do in the book is, translate what the justices are doing into plain English, while also pointing to the actual words they use, right? So I'm not just summarizing or characterizing, right, what they say. But, I want to make it a book that anyone who is concerned about what is happening in our politics and our legal system can read. So, I mentioned or referred to the chapter that's, there's always money in politics. All of the chapters have like a pop culture theme. And so one of the chapters, that chapter is Arrested Development. The chapter on, the Republican justices thinking that civil rights for the LGBT community are like attacks on them is about Mean Girls. And so I liken the Supreme Court justices to Mean Girls, who are like, I can't have a lesbian at my pool party, Janice. So, I think everyone should know more about what the Supreme Court is kind of doing to our constitutional system, because, if you read some of the pieces and surveys of Trump voters in the last election, many times some of them will say, well, Joe Biden promised student debt relief. He didn't do it. But what they don't realize is it was the Supreme Court that didn't let him do it. And so I want people to know how powerful the Supreme Court has become and how they are using their power to make it easier for Republicans, harder for Democrats, and people need to know that.
Do you think that the Supreme Court is more powerful than they were like 10, 20 years ago?
Absolutely. So they're definitely more powerful than they were, back when the Supreme Court was first created. So I discuss in the book, it's unimaginable today, but some of the first Supreme Court justices actually quit being Supreme Court justices and decided, I'd rather be the governor of a state, like the New York governor, than a Supreme Court justice, because Supreme Court justices didn't have that much power and the job kind of sucked. And instead, they have become these super powerful individuals that decide all of these issues that are so important to our lives. And it didn't used to be that way.
Gosh.
The justices used to have to work in Congress's basement. They didn't even have their own building.
I guess they were just like the last bastion to be like, okay, did they make a ruling? Was it, yeah, they were right. Like, it probably in the beginning was just really just double checking that whatever the court said before was actually right. But now it seems as though it exists as a tool to like overturn a bunch of things. So now I love that you have sort of a pop culture theme. I do think it's important. I love that you have a theme, and I love that you do such a good job of sort of distilling a lot of these legal, sort of ideas down to the average person who can pick this up and read it. Such an easy read. And I even think it's apparent that, especially with social media, I think people are taking more of an interest in these things anyway, obviously because it's in front of their faces. But I think that since they don't have like the actual knowledge, they didn't actually go to law school, but they talk they speak almost as if they did, and or at least with the confidence of
Yes.
that a lot of times. And so I think that you giving people a something to use, a book to read, a tool that they can use is really helpful. Because people need. I think we have to be engaged, or we just. What's the alternative?
I mean, the alternative isn't great. And if you want some examples of how being informed can make a difference, I would say when people were outraged about some of the cuts that Donald Trump was making to certain federal budget items or closing Social Security offices, people got him to reverse course because of the amount of outrage and attention that was being paid to some of these issues. And we're not going to be able to fix everything that way, obviously, but we will be able to fix some things and in the process help a lot of people. And that's got to be worth something, even if, staying informed, making your voice heard doesn't solve everything right now. It does do something. And so, yeah, that is part of the goal in writing the book. Obviously I'm a teacher. I like teaching and educating, and I kind of view this as more of like a outside the classroom teaching part of the job.
Well, I'm grateful, and I feel like I've gotten a chance to be a part of your class now, even though I've never gone to any type of law school or anything. I want to see now. Okay, well, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions about some sort of things are in the news, if it's okay. Thoughts and impact on the headline of young toddlers having to represent themselves in immigration court.
Oh, it is so appalling. And this is, I think, a space where historically presidents have had a lot of authority over immigration proceedings and immigration law. And so it's not an accident that that is the area where Donald Trump is trying to do some of the worst things. He is abusing the authority that Congress has given the president, that the Supreme Court has given presidents over immigration. And going back to our earlier discussion, it does seem like a lot of this is truly just designed to terrify people and be so cruel that it scares people, away from coming to the United States. It scares them if they're here from going to the police station or going to the hospital because they're concerned that ICE is going to find them and then shove their kids into these immigration enforcement proceedings. And it does code to me as something like a campaign of terror that they're doing.
I mean, most definitely. That is for sure, because seeing those images, I mean, what else can you take from that? How safe do you think we are from the SAVE Act and being as though they didn't vote on it? I'm sure that they will try again, but how safe are we from the SAVE Act? How much do you think it's actually going to really impact swaths of Americans and who want to vote? And do you think it's going to come back? Yeah,
so the SAVE Act, just for people who might not have been following it, is this federal law that would make it harder to vote if you changed your name. And so that would affect so many people. I mean, just think of all of the reasons you might have for changing your name. Some people who go by a nickname opt to change their legal name and adopt that as their legal name. Obviously, like individuals who want to live in accordance with their gender identity also might change their name. Women, men who get married, sometimes they'll hyphenate their last name. Sometimes one will take, the other person's name. And so that law could effectively jeopardize all of those people's ability to vote. And, this is one of those examples where I truly think it makes a difference for you to make your voice heard and to signal, particularly to Democratic politicians, that this is an absolute no-no, because they could only pass this law with 60 votes in the Senate. And so they would need some Democrats to go along with it. And I have to think Democrats are easier to shame out of voting yes on this than Republicans would be.
I mean, it seems so obvious.
Yes.
If a lot of the people that this administration happens to be targeting and demonizing and talking about all the time are the very types of people who will be directly impacted, like you just said. Do Democrats really want to be like, well, we're going to let them cancel out half of our voters,
right?
For the, then what are we going to give you money for? Like what? Then the game is over.
Yeah.
I'm trying to log on and see if there's any preliminary questions that people may have left via email. But we are down in the comments, answering questions that you're submitting and asking during the stream here. But if you have any deeper questions that you want answered, you can always reach out to Professor Litman. Do you want people to reach out to you on your social media? Do you get questions?
Yeah,
there?
so I do sometimes. I am happy to try and answer questions. Sometimes I'll do a post on Blue Sky. That's kind of the main posting platform I'm on right now. I have done a few short videos on TikTok and Instagram, but also if you want to just learn a lot more about the Supreme Court, there is a book, Lawless, How the Supreme Court Runs on Conservative Grievance, Fringe Theories, and Bad Vibes, that I do think will help to understand a lot of what is happening in our politics and court system right now. So, recently, just to take one example, the Supreme Court allowed the Trump administration to enforce its ban on transgender service members. And that case, to me, really encapsulates how the Republican justices switch equality and discrimination to mean the opposite of each other. Because one thing that I note in the book is, so a little over a decade ago, the Supreme Court invalidated the Defense of Marriage Act, this federal law that said the federal government was not going to recognize marriages between persons of the same sex. And in that case, one of the Republican justices, Justice Scalia, was so angry. He wrote a dissent that said, when the court says it's illegal to discriminate against same-sex marriages, they are adjudging opponents of marriage equality to be enemies of the human race. Like he was saying, right, upholding
human race.
Exactly. Upholding equality is rank discrimination against people opposed to equality. And then you think, okay, the Supreme Court just let this horrific ban on transgender service members go into effect when that policy labels an entire group of people as unable to, fit the military's conception of honesty, humility, and trustworthiness. Like that policy said horrible things about an entire community. And you think that saying that would be bad? You think that acknowledging that would be discrimination? And so that's this kind of mindset that we were talking about earlier, where they view any criticism of them or attempts to label their position as discrimination or unequal as illegal. And I think if people understood that, they would have a better sense of how the Republican appointees on the Supreme Court are operating the same way as the Trump administration is. Because, of course, those guys love to do it too.
They love it. Yeah. Speaking of, just saw that the, can't remember her name, the cake lady who didn't want to bake the cake for speaking of marriage equality, didn't want to make the wedding cake for the gay couple, has said she's going to appeal her court to the Supreme Court, now. So
there are so many of these plaintiffs who have been challenging marriage equality and civil rights protections for the LGBT community. There was the woman who didn't want to make the cake. There was the wedding website designer who didn't want to make the wedding website. There was the florist who didn't want to make floral bouquets. The list goes on and on. And now, again, because they just keep asking for more, there's a case at the Supreme Court where a group of parents are objecting to, get this, having books in schools that have LGBT characters in them. They're like, you can't even do that because that is
want any of it.
So offensive to me. And yeah, I mean, I could talk about the oral argument in that case forever, but it's wild.
Well, do you now? I remember talking about and acknowledging the onslaught of anti-LGBTQ legislation that had made its way either through just legislatures in general or even to the courts through the certain court systems, and celebrating when many of those things were not successful in passing or getting enshrined into law or whatever it was. And we also witnessed during the pandemic with the Trump administration's challenges to election fraud, essentially, they were claiming that of all of the cases, a minuscule amount of them actually went the distance, and that most of them were either thrown out or whatever, and they obviously lost most of them. And so do you think it'll be, it is clear from where I'm sitting that the judicial branch is in trouble. So do they know that, do you think?
Who's they here?
Okay, yeah, that's fair. The people within the judicial branch of government.
They certainly do not know that. I mean, the judges and justices are convinced they're doing awesome. So I'll just give you two examples of this. It's like, how delulu can you be? When Justice Sam Alito wrote the opinion overruling Roe versus Wade, he said in the opinion, we Supreme Court justices cannot be bothered to think about things like public opinion because, we are just so focused on legal principle.
Oh.
Right. Yeah, right. News to me. Also, that seemed to be imagining the more wrong people think you are, the more right you are. That is just.
And the more they lean into it.
Right. Exactly. And so that's one example. And then the other one is, in the last few weeks, Chief Justice John Roberts has given statements to the press about, well, of course, we all care about the independence of the judges who are there to check the excesses of the president and Congress. And it's like, where were you last summer?
Are you showing that?
Right, exactly. Where were you last summer when you gave the president immunity for criming? And so they have this picture of themselves. And honestly, I wish I had the confidence of the Republican judges and justices. I mean, can you imagine going about the world constantly thinking, I am the shit? Because that is what they are doing.
I mean, but they're, it's this thing that's so strange is that they're involved in the dismantling of a lot of the laws and protections that we have relied on for so long. And if the current head of the executive branch is referring back to some turn of the pre-2 century ago law, then they're clearly up to, it's not business as usual. And not that I like business as usual, but it does feel like this might be an opportunity. And this is the smallest thing with the current administration limiting access to federal funding for anything that's related to people, anything that they don't like, and I guess sort of mandating to cities or city halls or whoever's running whatever municipalities about their pride flags.
Yeah.
Seeing just two cities sort of officially make those a part of their city emblem or city, whatever it's signals is a way to get around some of that. So they're enshrining LGBT like sort of pride flags into their swath of city flags that they use, dodging this. And I hope that means they'll be able to get their federal funding. Do you think that maybe is there a silver lining? Do you think that we have an opportunity to do it right? I mean, part of the reason we saw Roe v. Wade crumble so quickly is because it wasn't codified. So part of the ways we saw so many things like that, we're seeing things fall apart because they weren't actually like locked in. And so is this our opportunity to like lock all these things in?
You can kind of think of the Trump administration as basically going around and identifying every single weak spot in our government and our democracy.
Because that's what they're using.
Right,
that's fair.
exactly.
That's fair.
And so they're basically telling, people on the left, Democrats, the next time in your office, here's the billion things you have to fix. And so I guess that's one positive spin on it. And I guess in some ways that's kind of what I'm trying to do for the Supreme Court in my book, is pointing out okay, here, right, these guys are just on a path to making our country less democratic. They're not going to let any Democrats govern. They're going to roll back rights that are enacted into law, codified into law, or protected in previous Supreme Court cases. And so we need to do something about all of those things too, so that we're not in this situation again where we are with Donald Trump or with the Supreme Court overruling Roe and not being prepared for that moment.
Gosh, I mean, yeah, that is the I guess sort of silver lining, and it does. I hope that people do end up getting more enthralled and enraged and engaged politically, like all year round, and because this is obviously an opportunity to do those kinds of things. But good grief, the lengths to which we'll allow this to happen, it does, I do, now I'm to the point now, who is going to be their next enemy? Like, politically. If you're doing political theater that's political terrorism, that's also, dismantling the government of the country that you're in, and you get rid of and basically make it clear that the opposition will never be in power, then you kind of also lose the game, because once you don't have any opponents, then what? Like, who are you going to keep demonizing and fighting? I'm not asking you that, but what do you think about that?
They always find someone, and this is part of the conservative grievance industrial complex that I talk about in the book. They always have to find some other to rail against,
new other,
and to portray as there's this evil group that is undermining American society, a threat to our way of life, and they're actually persecuting us, to justify whipping everyone into a frenzy. And I think to ignore the ways in which the Trump administration isn't actually doing anything to improve people's lives. They have not lowered the price of eggs. They have instead, enacted these huge taxes on all of us through their tariffs. And they want people to forget about that and focus on, the Trump administration is going after these people that I don't like instead. And that is very much a part of how toxic this conservative grievance mindset is.
It also does feel really clearly it's poisonous, but it does feel sort of like the antithesis of what people would be doing if they were actually concerned about their own best interest. Unless you are a millionaire and you're flying out around in a jet, I don't understand why, but it does seem like people are starting to wake up just a little bit. Do you think that when we're revamping the country, we should make it so that everyday citizens actually have access to the Supreme Court in a meaningful way, rather than having to wait on some line and almost never get in?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think we need to democratize the Supreme Court in so many ways. Like, one of the problems I focus on with the court in the book is how far removed the court has become from the people and the people's lives whose decisions are affecting. And so at a minimum, there's no reason why the court's oral arguments and when they announce their opinions shouldn't be publicized and televised. We should know, like,
we can hear the recording.
Exactly. We should know when they are going to release their big opinion. So
yeah, why are they surprising us? It's not cute.
No.
It's not cute.
It's never a good surprise, right? So,
it's never. Yeah.
So just give us a heads up so we can brace ourselves and swaddle ourselves in blankets
yeah.
when we know something bad is coming down. No, I absolutely think like we need to give people more access to the Supreme Court than they have now, for sure.
Who did you clerk for?
So I clerked for Justice Anthony Kennedy, who was, so he was appointed by Ronald Reagan, a Republican, but he kind of famously wrote these big cases protecting LGBT rights, like Lawrence versus Texas, which struck down laws that criminalized same-sex sexual intimacy. He also wrote the marriage equality decision in Obergefell versus Hodges. And he, people might not know, one of his big mentors and this person who testified on his behalf when he was nominated to the Supreme Court and helped Justice Kennedy along in his career was a man who was widely believed to have been closeted throughout his entire life. And Justice Kennedy watched him suffer in a society that didn't allow him to live openly. And I think a fair number of people think, I include myself in that category, that him seeing that up front really made him understand, the dignity of the LGBT community and the importance of civil rights protections. And, although that is like a positive story in this instance, it does really underscore how much the justice's life experience affects how they view the world. And part of what is so concerning about our current Supreme Court is you have these 6 Republican appointees who just grew up in this very closed universe where they were told, you are the best, you are entitled to everything, and people are out to get you because of your beliefs. And so like that is what they project on the court.
Oh, it's messy, but the only saving grace is this book. I'm so happy that this came out because that you wrote this and that you worked so long on this. How long did it take for you to put this together?
So I started writing it in summer of 2023, and I basically kept working on it through January 2025. So I was able to say some things about how the Supreme Court paved the way for Donald Trump's election and how the court's decisions that like blew up laws limiting money in politics allowed Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, to basically purchase himself access to the presidency. So it does, go into the moment that we are in right now. Can I just share my favorite pop culture reference from the book?
Yes, please.
Okay, so as I said, I tried to make it kind of fun. And the very first chapter, the pop culture motif, is the Barbie movie. And so I liken the Supreme Court's attacks on reproductive freedom and women's rights and feminism to a Ken-surrection, like where Ken goes to the real world and he's like, oh my gosh, the patriarchy is awesome. Let's make Barbie Land into a patriarchy. And I say, that's what the Republican appointees are doing with our Constitution. Like they are trying to launch a Ken-surrection to bring back, a patriarchy.
They really are.
They are.
And that's genius, of course.
And
This
they're
is
not nearly as
absolutely
charming
genius.
as Ryan Gosling, so we can't let them
Not
get away with it.
nearly, darling. There's like zero benefit
No.
to that, for sure. For at least half the population. Are there any other? Okay, so the Kinsurrection of the courts. You can't sit with us.
That's the
Winter
Mean
is
Girls
coming.
chapter, yeah.
That's the Mean Girls chapter. Winter is coming. That's voting.
Yep.
I remember. I mean, even Trump used that term in the from Game of Thrones. There's always money in America. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And what's that? What's the pop culture?
That's Arrested Development. So it's like about this.
Oh, that is
yeah,
Arrested
yeah, like the clueless Bluth family, who, deludes themselves into thinking,
Yeah.
they are entitled to everything. They earn their family fortune through treason. And so I kind of liken the clueless Republican justices to the Bluths.
There's always, I'm sorry, the American Psychos of the Supreme Court. That is accurate.
Yeah.
Accurate. And people are obsessed with American Psycho.
Yeah. So the American Psychos one, that I got some giggles out of that. So for those of you who have seen American Psycho, Patrick Bateman is this like serial killer disguised as a lawyer. And so I liken the justices to that because, Bateman's like simmering murderous rage fits into his life as a lawyer. And I gotta say, like, the Republican justices simmering murderous rage against democracy and government. Like, they try to cloak it in law and being a lawyer too. So like I said, I wrote this book for like everyone and anyone who wants to learn more. And I hope I made it like enjoyable in the process.
Okay, so let's do a surprise chapter.
Okay.
What would you name in a pop culture in the same way, looking at the Supreme Court, understanding that, okay, I don't understand this, this may not be true, with my assumption that people invest in their legal career, their legal political career, so that the next class of whoever would be going into the Supreme Court, maybe that's starting to emerge in normal times. I know that like whoever played so-and-so on The Apprentice is probably going to be the next Supreme Court justice inducted into the, but for the like uplifting version of who you'd like to see based on what you've seen coming through, what would you name that chapter?
Oh man. Okay. So I kind of want
Sorry
to
to put
think.
you on the spot.
No, I kind of want to think about the pop culture reference first, and what is a happy, uplifting story that comes from pop culture. Okay. Did you watch the TV show Never Have I Ever, the Mindy Kaling one?
I never
You
did.
never did?
Never have I ever.
Okay.
But I'm an oddball.
Okay, so I would do it off of Never Have I Ever because I thought that was like one of the most charming, heartwarming TV series ever, and definitely recommend everyone go to watch it. So yeah, it would be inspired based on Never Have I Ever and like the main character's journey.
I love that. Okay, I love that. Now, besides getting this book, what is one message that you want all of the viewers in the chat today, and anybody that's watching a clip of this on social media, what's the first action item? If the first action item is go out and get the book, read a copy of this book, and you don't have to buy it. I know that everybody doesn't have
Ask
access
your library. Ask your library to get it.
Yeah, I was going to say, while they're still standing, and if the library is is active, if you're able to like actually go and speak with if you live in an area where there's actually a physical library, please go and talk to your librarian, because that'll let them know that their job is of value and that the service that they provide is of value. And for those of you that don't live near a library, then digitally you might have access to it on apps like Libby, things like that, just in general for books across the thing. But you can also get this on Alstora, which is where I have my book club, and ours is a history book club, so it's not quite there. This brand new book, and this is current events. Sorry to say, folks, this is not like a nice dream of the history. But you can get it on allstora.com. And besides that, it's really imperative. I know that we've all been sort of lulled into being. We've gotten used to being a certain way. Yeah. That's the nice way for me to say we have been lulled into being consumers who don't challenge. And the point at which people, historic folks from the point at which Martin Luther King would have been inspired, the point at which, you know, Susan B. Anthony would have been inspired to get up and do what they did so famously throughout history, which a lot of times has been whitewashed. The point at which they would have been inspired to do that were the same types of actions and incidents that we're seeing today. But the point at which they would have inspired to do that is the same point at which we put in a really good movie about that. And then we don't actually get up and do anything about it. We get the feeling of exhilaration and danger and all that from the content that we consume, that we are purchasing or that we're subscribed to, instead of getting out and doing something. The only reason why we have experienced doing anything different that I can think of in most of our lives collectively is 2020, when the world stopped and we were forced to kind of make a change. And so reading is definitely a part of that change, I would say, and getting out and understanding more about the world that we are in. Yeah. We have to do it through books, through education, books and entertainment, and art. And not entertainment, actual art, which can be entertaining, but it also can be educational as well. Do you have a final word on anything about that?
Register to vote. Make sure your friends are registered to vote as well. And figure out a fun way to stay up to speed on what's going on. You know, it might be a great YouTube station. It might be a great Instagrammer. It might be a great podcast, but figure out how you would like to stay up to speed on what's going on.
Well, I can say, you know, it's really important that, you know, I have a lot of, you know, there's a lot of people that are in this country that actually do have a bone to pick, and their grievance could be valid. I think of the promise of America and the connection that my ancestors who were brought here have to this country. There's a little bit of a bone to pick when we talk about, like, you know, where's our reparations? You know, we did work that we were not paid for. Even as freed, formerly enslaved people. And so that's a type of grievance that I think we could stick with. But the type of grievance that we're seeing out of the Supreme Court and from the conservative right, I think is clearly just opposition optics, opposite. It's just the opposite of what is actually happening. And so if you want to do anything about this, folks, if you want to actually live up and realize the slogan that our country has, of the people, for the people, by the people, we the people, any of that, then we have to actually be engaged. You know, this country cannot no longer exist serving you in the way that it has with the future that is before us. We need to be involved. And that might mean you've got a lot less time to do the things you like to do. But one of the things to make it easier is to, while we can, engage with the things that are effective, but also enjoyable, like this book. And if you find yourself being allegiant to the typical powers that be, the ones that got us here, rethink that. I really do think the salve, the antidote to impart that everyday people can be involved in to what's happening right now is, this is very far right. Not the book. It's very far. This moment is very far right. We need to figure out a way to actually introduce leftist ideas into your brain and into your life and into your moral compass. And that doesn't mean the Democrats. The Democrats in America are not left wing. They are to the left of certain things. But when we're talking about leftist ideals, one of the main things that I think is going to protect us, again, is education, actual art, and the theory of mutual aid. And that is what we have to think about. You are doing a great service.
Thank you.
For us by working so hard and providing us knowledge that you worked hard to obtain, and we're really grateful. So, folks, you don't have to go to law school.
Nope.
How many books do you think you read in law school? This is one book. This will give you some insight and maybe even some inspiration. So thanks for tuning in. You can find the book, Lawless, How the Supreme Court Runs on Conservative Grievance, Fringe Theories, and Bad Vibes. You can find it everywhere that you can get books. Of course, I would love for you to get it on allstore.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. And Professor Leah Litman, thank you so much.
Thank you, Peppermint.
Bye, everybody.